These Violent Delights, Chapter 2. The silence turned to screams. The screams turned to chaos, and Juliet rolled up her shiny sleeves. Her lips thinned and her brow furrowed. "Mr. Montagov," she said over the uproar, "you need to leave." Juliet marched forward, waving her two nearby scarlet men to come close. They obliged, but not without a strange expression, which Juliet almost took offense at. Until 2 beats later, she blinked and looked over her shoulder to find Roma still standing there, very much not leaving. Instead, he surged past her, acting like he owned the place, then dropped to a crouch near the dying man, squinting at the man's shoes, of all things. "For crying out loud," Juliet muttered under her breath. She pointed the 2 scarlets at Roma. "Escort him out." It was what they had been waiting for. One of the scarlets immediately pushed the air of the white flowers roughly, forcing Roma to spring to his feet with a hiss so he wouldn't tumble into the bloody floor. "I said, escort him," Juliet snapped at the scarlet. "It's the Mid-Autumn Festival. Don't be a brute." "But, Miss Kai, don't you see?" Roma cut in coldly, pointing a finger at the dying man. He turned to face Juliet, his jaw tight, eyes level on her. Only her. He acted like nobody else was present in his line of sight save for Juliet. Like the 2 men weren't glaring daggers at him, like the whole club wasn't screaming in havoc, running in circles about the growing puddle of blood. "This is exactly what happened last night. It is not a one-off incident. It is madness." Juliet sighed, waving a floppy wrist. The 2 scarlet men took a proper hold of Roma's shoulders, and Roma swallowed his words with an audible snap of his jaw. He wouldn't make a scene in scarlet territory. He was already lucky to be living without a bullet hole in his back. He knew this. It was the only reason why he tolerated being manhandled by men he might have killed on the streets. "Thank you for being so understanding," she simpered. Roma said nothing as he was hauled from her sight. Juliet watched him, eyes narrowed, and only when she was certain he had been pushed out of the door of the burlesque club did she focus on the mess in front of her. Stepping forward with a sigh and kneeling gingerly beside the dying man. There was no saving with a wound like this. It was still spurting blood, pulsating red puddles onto the floor. Blood was certainly seeping into the fabric of her dress, but Juliet hardly felt it. The man was trying to say something. Juliet couldn't hear what. "You'd do well to put him out of his misery." Walter Dexter had found his way near the scene and was now peering over Juliet's shoulder with an almost quizzical expression. He remained unmoving even when the waitress started pushing the crowd back and cordoning the area off, yelling for the onlookers to scatter. Irritatingly, none of the scarlet men bothered to haul Walter away. He had a look to him that made him seem like he needed to be there. Juliet had met plenty of men like him in America. Men who assumed they had the right to do whatever they wished because the world had been built to favor their civilized etiquette. That sort of confidence knew no bounds. "Hush," Juliet snapped, laying her ear closer to the dying man. If he had last words, he deserved to be heard. "I've seen this before. It's the lunacy of an addict, perhaps methamphetamine or—" "Hush!" Juliet focused until she could hear the sounds coming from the dying man's mouth. Focused until the hysteria around her faded to the background noise. "Gwai, gwai, gwai, gwai?" Head spinning, Juliet ran through every word that resembled what the man was chanting. The only one that made sense was... "Monster?" she asked him, gripping his shoulder. "Is that what you meant to say?" The man stilled. His gaze was startlingly clear for the briefest second. Then, in a fast garble, he said, "Hu'u ban dan shin." After that one breath, one exhale, one warning, his eyes glazed over. Juliet reached out, numb, and brushed his eyelids closed. Before she could quite register the dead man's words, Kathleen had already stepped forward to cover him with a tablecloth. Only his feet were sticking out in those tattered shoes that Roma had been staring at. "They're mismatched," Juliet noted suddenly. One shoe was sleek and shined, still glinting with its last polish. The other was far too small, and a different color entirely. The fabric held together by a thin piece of string wrapped thrice around the toes. Strange. "What was that? What did he say?" Walter was still lurking at her elbow. He didn't seem to understand that this was the cue to remove himself. He didn't seem to care that Juliet was staring forward at a state of stupefaction, wondering how Roma had timed his visit to coincide with his death. Misfortunes tend to come all at once, Juliet translated when she finally jolted to the frenzy of the situation. Walter Dexter only looked at her blankly, trying to understand why a dying man would say something so convoluted. He didn't understand the Chinese and their love for proverbs. His mouth was opening, likely to give another spiel about his extensive knowledge regarding the world of drugs, another plug about the dangers of purchasing products from those he deemed untrustworthy, but Juliet held up a finger to stop him. If she was certain of anything, it was that they weren't the last words of a man who took too many drugs. This was the final warning of a man who had seen something he shouldn't have. Let me correct myself. You British have an appropriate translation, she said. When it rains, it pours. High above the leaky pipes and moldy carpeting of the White Flower house, Elisa Montagava was perched upon a wooden beam on the ceiling rafters, her chin pressed against the flat of her knees as she eavesdropped on the meeting below. The Montagavs didn't live in a big, flashy residence like their money bags could afford. They preferred to stay in the heart of it all, one and the same with the dirt-smeared faces picking up trash on the streets. From the outside, their living space looked identical to the row of apartments along the bustling city street. On the inside, they had transformed what used to be an apartment complex into one big jigsaw puzzle of rooms and offices and staircases, maintaining the place not with servants or maids, but with hierarchy. It wasn't just the Montagavs who lived there, but any White Flower who held some role in the game, and among the assortment of people coming and going in this house, within the walls and outside, there was an order. Lord Montagav reigned at the top, and Roma, at least in name, stood second. But below roles were constantly changing, determined by will rather than blood. Where the Scarlet Gang depended on relationships, on which family went to the furthest back before the country crumbled from its imperial throne, the White Flowers operated on chaos, on constant movement. But the climb to power was one of choice, and those who remained low within the gang did so by their own desire. The point of becoming a White Flower wasn't power and riches. It was knowing that they could walk at any point, and if they didn't like the orders given by the Montagavs. It was a fist to the chest, a lock of eyes, a nod of understanding. Like that, the Russian refugees flying into Shanghai would do anything to join the ranks of the White Flowers, anything to reunite with the sense of belonging they had left behind when the Bolsheviks came knocking. For the men, at least. The Russian women, unfortunate enough not to be born into the White Flowers, picked up jobs as dancers and mistresses. Just last week, Elisa had overheard a British woman crying about a state of emergency in the international settlement, of families being broken up by pretty faces from Siberia who had no fortune, only face and figure and a will to live. The refugees had to do what they must. Moral compasses meant nothing in the face of starvation. Elisa jolted. The man she had been eavesdropping on had suddenly started whispering. The abrupt change in volume drew her attention back to the meeting below. "The political factions have made too many snide remarks," a gruff voice muttered. "It is almost certain that the politicians are engineering the madness. But it is hard to say at this point in time whether the Kuomintang or the communists are responsible. Many sources say Zhang Gutai, well, though I hesitate to believe it." Another voice added dryly, "Please, Zhang Gutai is so bad at being Secretary General of the Communist Party that he printed the wrong date on one of their meeting posters." Elisa could see three men seated opposite her father through the thin mesh that lined the ceiling space. Without risking a fall from the rafters, she couldn't quite pick out their features. But the accented Russian gave away, though. They were Chinese spies. What do we know of their methods? How does this madness spread? That was her father now, his slow voice as distinctive as nails against a chalkboard. Lord Montagav spoke in such a commanding manner that it felt like a sin to deny him your full attention. One of the Chinese men cleared his throat. He was wringing his hands in his shirt so aggressively that Elisa leaned forward into the rafters, squinting through the mesh to see if she was mistaking the motion. A monster. Elisa almost toppled over. Her hands came down on the beam just in time to right herself, letting out a small exhale in relief. "I beg your pardon?" We cannot confirm anything regarding the source of the madness except for one thing, the third and final man said. It is linked to the sightings of a monster. I saw it myself. I saw silver eyes in the Huangpu River, blinking in a way no man could— Enough, enough, Lord Montagov interrupted. His tone was rough, impatient with the turn this information briefing had taken. I have no interest in hearing nonsense on a monster. If that is all, I look forward to reconvening at our next meeting. Frowning, Elisa scuttled along the beams, following the men as they left. She was already 12 years old, but she was tiny, always darting from shadow to shadow in the manner of a wild rodent. As the door shut below, she hopped from one ceiling beam to another until she was pressed flat directly above the men. He looked afraid, one remarked quietly. The man in the middle hushed him, except the words had already been said and birthed into the world, becoming sharp arrows tearing through the room with no target in mind, only destruction. The men pulled their coats tightly around their bodies and left the broiling, chaotic mess of the Montagovs' house behind them. Elisa, however, remained in her little nook up in the ceiling. Fear. That was something she didn't think her father knew how to feel anymore. Fear was a concept for the men without guns. Fear was reserved for people like Elisa, small and slight and always looking over her shoulder. If Lord Montagov was afraid, the rules were changing. Elisa leaped from the ceiling and sprinted off.